Hi everyone, I'm Jesse Lynn.
And I'm Angela Lynn. Welcome back to another episode of But Where Are You Really From? We do have a special guest today. We have Sunny Horstmann right now joining us from Taiwan.
Hi,
Hello.
Jesse. Hi, Angela. Thank you guys so much for having me on your podcast. So excited to be here.
Thanks for joining us at 8:40 a.m. your time.
I'm glad we somehow figured it out. It's so confusing figuring out the time zones.
Awesome. So, Sunny, we kind of came across each other on the socials because I have my Real You Mandarin online course stuff. And then within that world, and I was kind of seeing like adjacent profiles, I think your bilingual parenting account kept coming up for me. It's the same kind of like circles. And so I think that's how we first got connected. And yeah, so I've been following your content for a while. I think it's really cool that you have this platform to help parents who want to encourage a bilingual environment for their kids. So, wanted to let you have the chance to introduce to our listeners what your platform is all about. And yeah, also loop in the answer to our signature guest question, but where are you really from?
Okay, so I run an account on Instagram and it's called Spotted Sunshine Chinese. And I basically coach parents how to raise bilingual kids overseas. So basically in monolingual contexts like America, Canada, Australia, even Singapore, because Singapore is still predominantly English speaking. And I just do this mainly because when I started raising my daughter bilingual in rural Minnesota in cornfields and nobody else was doing it, it was pretty lonely and it was a big struggle because I think for most Americans it's still kind of strange to teach your child a different language when America is predominantly, most places is monolingual. And so I wanted to give that support to parents who also have the same desires to pass on their heritage language or just to teach their kids another language, Mandarin Chinese specifically, and help them feel supported, help them feel less lonely, and that there are other parents doing it and people who want to support them and encourage them, because it could be really overwhelming if you go online and try to find the resources or join Facebook groups. It could be pretty overwhelming. So I want to be a space where this is encouraged and parents find the support that they need. Oh, and your question. It's so funny because I feel like before we moved to Taiwan for 3 years, my husband and I spent 3 years in Taiwan. I would say for most of my life growing up in America, I would say I'm Taiwanese. I'm from Taiwan. But then when I lived here for 3 years, I was like, I am clearly not Taiwanese. I am Taiwanese American, Now I would say I am Taiwanese American that was born in Taiwan. I don't know if that clearly answers your question, because I feel like that question is also very it makes you wonder yeah, where am I really from?
Yes, existential crisis question, the name of our show. Um, so you mentioned 3 years living in Taiwan with your husband. What brought about that decision?
I think after I immigrated to America when I was 8 with my family, I always felt like Taiwan was my home, and my goal in life was somehow turned into I want to go back to Taiwan and live there, to where I really belong and where I feel like I fit in and where my relatives are. When we had an opportunity, it was a church ministry that we could be a part of. So we came back and did that for 3 years. And my husband, he's American. He's actually Native American, but he wanted to learn Chinese. So when we were here, he actually went to a local university and took the language classes. And now he could speak to our kids in Mandarin Chinese, at a child level, and have basic conversations. So that was predominantly why we were here during that time. But it was really hard because the culture is just so different. And I was like, please do not treat me like this. This is like, it was like going against my basic understanding of like human rights, the way people were treating people in the workplace. I was just like, it was like a pretty toxic environment. I was like, I can't do this. So I started tutoring English on the side because then I'm like my own boss and I could still be here.
Oh man. Well, that is very cool that your husband also is
Yeah.
like invested in learning Mandarin, because I don't think like every couple that has aspirations to do bilingual parent or bilingual environment for their kids has both parents able to speak. Do you feel like that has been like a huge advantage? Or you mentioned childlike, so I don't know what, like how that play your two roles play, but like how has that dynamic been from, I guess, when he knew nothing till after like his current level in terms of your aspirations for bilingual parenting?
Yeah, I feel like I didn't understand what a gift that was until I started coaching other parents or seeing other parents in the bilingual Facebook groups talking about their partners not being supportive or not understanding, because raising bilingual kids, it's like a huge investment, not only financially, but like with your time and mentally and emotionally. And if you feel like you are the only source of Mandarin input for your kids, it could be a lot of pressure. It could almost feel like you're single parenting. So once I started hearing other stories from other parents, I'm like, oh, thank you so much for being so supportive. Because when he was learning Mandarin and he would ask me questions like, why do we say this? And what's the grammatical, like, what's the grammar rules? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I have no idea. Like, please go ask somebody else. It's like hard to teach your spouse the language. But yeah, it's totally been such a great support. And also, like right now we're in Taiwan for 3 months. He could work remotely, which has been really nice, but then he still has to work odd hours. Like he's up until 1 a.m. And once daylight saving begins, he has to be up until like 2 a.m. in Taiwan. And then our kids get up at like 6:30. So it's just been really great to have that support, because it is, like I said, it takes a lot of time, a lot of like investment. And when you have a partner who's willing to invest in it with you, it's a lot easier, I would say.
That's awesome. Can you speak to like the motivation behind teaching your children a second language? Because I feel like even amongst our peer group, there are definitely some Asian people where some of them don't speak Mandarin and their parents kind of just made the decision like it's easier not to do it. So I'd be curious to hear what your motivations behind that are.
It's kind of funny because one of the tips in the beginning was like, know your why you want to teach your kids Chinese. And it was very simple for me. So I thought like my answer was not profound enough for a long time. But I think it's just basically that's who I am. And I want to pass that down. And also, I love being bilingual. I love coming back to Taiwan and being able to have conversations with my relatives and hear their stories in their heart language instead of them trying to say it to me in English and missing some parts of it. And just being able to come back to Taiwan and go out by myself and order what I want to eat and go to the, and not have to have somebody with me to help me. Granted, like most people in Taipei, if you try to like order something, it's like not too challenging. But I think it boils down to, like in America, a lot of parents want their kids to learn basketball or do soccer because when they were kids, they did soccer, and they want their kids to kind of have the same experience. So I think for me, when I like thought more about it, I'm like, yeah, I feel like that's just a part of who I am. And I want them to have the same experience and the same opportunity. If they don't like it later on, I'm not going to force them, but just kind of set them up. So if they want to continue later on in life, they have that option.
So something you just said I immediately was like, how would my parents have done this? So you said, I'm not going to force them to keep doing it if they don't want. So I don't know if your parent, I mean, you were born in Taiwan and lived there till you were 8. So that's a little bit different because I really think you already had more Mandarin skills than like Jesse and I have currently, probably because we always joke about how we were forced to go to Chinese school for like just 12 years, whatever, from age 5 to 17. It's only once a week, 3 hours for once in a week, right? But we were forced to go. So it really felt like we didn't want to be there. And it was just like, we have to go, we have no choice. Like, it was not a fun learning environment. So where is your threshold in terms of like that? You know, you're enforcing this environment now to try to build the foundation, but you're also expressing that you want your kids to actually want to learn the language later. Like, are you going to cut it off at a certain age, or like, how are you going to decide when it's the optional time?
I feel like it's kind of funny because the way my mom taught me Mandarin or kept up the language in our home is very different from most like ABCs or ABTs. I did go to Sunday like Chinese school, and I had to like live through that like many of us, and it was just not fun because it was like another day of school when your friends have the weekend off and it's boring, and the way they teach it is like, even to this day, I feel like they approach it with a very traditional mindset of how they learn Chinese in Taiwan, you know, and it's like volunteers, it's moms who probably don't have a lot of training. So for my mom, I actually stopped Chinese school around maybe like elementary school, because by 8 years old, I was able to read Bopoma, like Zhuing, and then also have like a good amount of Chinese characters. And then my mom did force me to do this like dreadful Chinese character competition where I had to memorize a bunch of Chinese characters. And in the competition, you have to read the character and make a phrase with it to let them know you actually know the character. But through memorizing all those characters, I was able to like increase the amount of Chinese characters I was able to read. So I love reading like comic books. I love watching, back then it was like Korean dramas weren't a thing. It was like Japanese dramas, and Japanese dramas, you have to read the subtitle to understand. And then also just like our trips to Taiwan, like I think it was like every 2 years. It wasn't even every year. She wouldn't put me in language camps or anything. And I would just come back, hang out with my cousins, listen to the music they were listening to, like Jade Chow and Ame. And I was like, ooh, and I would bring it back. And that's how my like interest in Mandarin kept going, was through music and comic books and like dramas. And it wasn't so much like write these Chinese characters, you know, memorize Chinese characters, go to Chinese Sunday school. And I feel like that's what really ignited my interest. And that's what I hope to pass on to my kids. Even during this trip, I want them to like take them to night markets, hang out with their cousins, and buy books that my daughter's interested in to help keep that interest going. Yeah, I feel like I haven't reached that place yet with my kids. They don't seem to hate Chinese right now, you know? I mean, they seem like pretty happy with it, but I do want to be like sensitive to that and not feel like I am forcing them to do something that I want to do, which is challenging because I feel like you don't realize until you're a parent how personal it is, like the language, how personal it is to try to teach your kids. Because some of the parents I coach, it's so discouraging for them when they hear their kids say, I hate Chinese, I don't like Chinese, you know? So I try to like equip them with tools of how to make it interesting and fun and engaging for their kids, instead of making it seem like a huge chore for everybody. Because not only is it not fun for your kids, but then for you as the parent too, because you're dragging them to Chinese class.
You've heard me complain about how weird it is to be an American-born Mandarin speaker because I grew up speaking Mandarin at home and have a passing native accent, but simultaneously sound like a child when trying to talk about real things. Since I realized no one out there was catering to people like us and decided, I'm just going to do it myself. I teamed up with my native Taiwanese Mandarin language teacher to create Real You Mandarin, a self-paced online Mandarin course built specifically for ABCs and ABTs. All of our content is video-based, realistic dialogues centered on topics you'd actually want to talk about, from dating and pop culture to media representation and growing up as a minority in a majority society. You'll learn the relevant vocabulary in the context you actually use them and be able to practice them daily with pre-built digital flashcards. You'll also be able to practice speaking by shadowing, repeating back, or following along with all of these dialogues to practice speaking at natural speed with the right pronunciations. Check out the course at realumandarin.com and get 10% off using promo code WhereAreYouFrom10. Let us help you express the real you when you speak Mandarin. Hey listeners, wondering how you can support us? The biggest way is by increasing our visibility by following us on Instagram at WhereAreYouFromPod, on TikTok at But Where Are You Really From, subscribing to our YouTube channel under But Where Are You Really From Podcast, rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, and telling your friends. The more people we can get to listen to the show, the more we can continue spotlighting different perspectives and stories. And if you feel so inclined, we're also accepting donations at buymeacoffee.com/whereareyoufrom. Thanks y'all. Speaking of not as fun or, not as pleasant side of things, what have been your kind of expectations or hopes versus reality in terms of actually creating a bilingual speaking environment for your kids? Like, are some things in how you imagined creating, like, certain ways of introducing language or fun games or practice or whatever that you're like, this is going to go this way. And then when you actually did it, it was like totally different, or things you thought they wouldn't like and then they actually really loved?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I really did not push writing Chinese characters, because I remember writing when I was in elementary school in Taiwan until I was like crying. Because my daughter's actually going to 3rd grade in Taiwan right now for these 3 months. I remember writing the characters and they care so much about your handwriting here. Whereas in America, it's like if you write I would see some of my daughter's English homework in America and I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, can your teacher read that? But I feel like here her teacher is very like, you need to use a ruler to draw a straight line. Like, you need to write in the correct stroke orders. And because I had those like negative connotations with writing Chinese or learning Chinese, I really actually was very hesitant to teach her writing or push her too much. But my daughter actually really enjoys writing Chinese characters. And now in schools here, they're not making you write it like 10 times, 15 times. It's like they have them write it like 4 times. And if you need additional practice, you could write 1 more time. So I feel like they've like lessened the pressure a little bit here. But that's the surprising thing, is seeing how my negative connotations with Chinese is affecting how I teach her and holding back from certain things that she actually enjoys. Kids just have a natural desire to learn. And if you know how to pour into that, it's really cool to see them like just hunger and thirst for more and more and more.
What are some strategies that you use to like translate some of these more traditional concepts into something that's fun to learn? Because I also remember that brushstroke stuff, and they were like very specific, and you had to learn with like they made us practice with like an actual brush and like a 4x4 paper that was like the size of my face, and it was like the stroke had to be like a kind of way, and I don't think like it particularly bothered me, but I was just never understood like why it had to be done this way. So I was just like, it didn't make any sense to me as a kid. So I'm just wondering, like, what are some of the ways that you make that more palatable for like the 5-year-old that's like asking a million whys about this particular thing?
So for my older one, when she was younger, I didn't actually teach her how to write Chinese. I didn't teach her stroke orders or anything. And we had this, like, on Amazon, you could buy these like huge calligraphy paper that's like disappearing ink. If you write it with water, it'll like disappear. And I would just let her draw Chinese instead of like, this is, you write this stroke first and then this stroke. I just let her draw and she enjoyed it. And I feel like that really took the pressure off. I think the hard thing about the way Chinese is taught traditionally is like, no, that's wrong. No, that's wrong. No, that's wrong. It's like constant correction where you feel like I'm just doing everything wrong. I'm such a screw up, So I feel like when you don't overcorrect and you let your kids explore, and it's like Chinese characters are actually very beautiful and creative. It's originated with a picture, but we don't have that connotation with Chinese characters because it's so much of like, you got to do it correctly. There's this right way to write it. But then when you step back and you look at, there's like more children's books now that help you look at the, like, is it called the pictogram or something, like the original character, how it started with a drawing and how it evolved, and different books to help you explore like, oh, if you add this radical and this radical, then it combines into, so it becomes like a puzzle instead of this is the right way to write it and you're writing it wrong, you terrible Chinese learner, you.
Oh my God, I have PTSD just like listening to this. I do feel like that is such an important concept, the idea of trying to make it fun instead of telling them this is just the way to do it and you're doing it wrong, because I totally believe that the overcorrection, at least for me, was like the main reason I hated going. The school is already boring enough, right? And then you go home and then the homework, my mom was just like hovering over me while I'm doing the homework, and then she'd be like, no, that's wrong, erase that right now and like do it the right way. And I was like, this is so much, and like I think it has a lasting impact, because I will say, like, I'm like, okay, full disclosure, we use this podcast also as therapy. And so in terms of like language learning, so my husband is from Spain and we speak English to each other, but because his parents are Spanish speaking only. Like I've spent many years learning Spanish before I even met him, and I was like fairly confident in it, but I'm not actually fluent, right? And so when I speak, sometimes I make mistakes. And the first time he corrected me, I was like so pissed. I took it so personally. And I was like, you're telling me I'm terrible. And he was like, what are you talking about? I'm just like, that's just not the correct way to say it. I'm just trying to help you like learn the proper way to say it. And I realized it was because my mom, like every time, you speak Mandarin at home, I mean, we have so much vocabulary we don't know, right? Because our learning kind of stopped at age 17 and we only did the 1 day a week thing. So every time she would correct me, it was just annoying, right? So then even if she was just in her mind, like helping me, quote unquote, helping me, right? Like to learn the proper way. To me, I immediately rejected whatever she said, didn't even input, right? Whatever the correct thing was, and was just like, you're just being mean to me. And that was like the end of it. And so I do think the overcorrection really like stops any interest in wanting to learn, and also hurts your relationship, because I was just like, oh, mom's just like a buzzkill. I don't want to approach this with mom anymore.
But I do love how like universal this idea of like art being a learning tool is, because I also remember like when I found out that some of the characters were actually pictograms, a lot of them just made more sense to me because I could see what that looked like. So like the character for fire, for like what, like the elemental ones, I was like, oh, this is very clear. Like I can picture what it looks like in my head because it kind of looks like fire, or it kind of looks like water, it kind of looks like wind, it kind of looks like earth. Like those concepts kind of clicked. But then you got like the more complicated characters, and I was like, oh, I don't know what this represents. Like there are some of the things where I'm like words for trust. I'm like, how would I draw that concept?
After like our 3 years in Taiwan, I was like, I really dislike Taiwanese culture, But I think now I'm like, having had some time to process it, I'm like, I feel like I understand why they are so critical about everything and want you to do it right, because this like the culture. It's the society. Like if you do it right, then you're going to excel in life and hopefully get a better job, and hearing how much people make here, like after graduating college, it's like the income is really low. And that's why when you come to Taiwan, the food is so cheap. A lot of stuff is really cheap. So I can understand the anxiety and the stress of not saying it's okay, but just why they're so critical and want you to do it right, because they want you to like succeed in life or not be criticized by other people or bring shame to the family or something. But I feel like it's like kind of also healing for me to teach my kids Chinese, because it's kind of like detoxing me from all the stuff that I was brought up with. And I was like, oh, wow, Chinese is actually a beautiful language. Oh, wow, it could be taught this different way. Or even what was hardest for me in the beginning was learning like gentle parenting phrases, like how to be patient verbally with my kids, because all I heard growing up was like, 快一点, like, hurry up, like, why are you doing that? 你有什么问题? Like, what's wrong with you? And I would see my like Caucasian mom friends, they're like, okay, sweetie, let's not do that. Let's try it again. And I'm like, how do I even say that in Chinese? And it would frustrate me so much because I was like, I'm going to do a Mandarin immersion environment at home. Everything's going to be in Mandarin. But in those moments where my kid was frustrating me so much, it would like frustrate me even more, because I'm like, I don't know how to say this in Chinese. I don't know how to be patient with her, how to be kinder in Mandarin. But as I worked at it more, I was like, oh, like, I can learn this. This is a skill I could acquire. And also now in Taiwan, there's more, not that, I mean, the culture is still very, what it's always been, but I feel like there's more awareness. There's actually podcasts, like parenting podcasts in Taiwan that talk about gentle parenting, how to be patient with your kids, how hitting your child is not going to, be resolve all the issues,
Wow, surprise, surprise. What are your top 3 daily gentle parenting phrases you use with your kids?
I think one that's useful, especially with my toddler right now, is like, let's try to do that again. Like, 我们再来试一次. 你可以再试一次吗? Like, can you try that again? How do you say that, with more patience? 你要怎么有耐心的讲? That's like one thing to help him practice. Like, okay, how do we say that correctly? How do we, say that with kindness? Because he's 2 and he's just like, blah, right now.
I like that the first thing you said was that how do we do that again? Because it's empowering the kid to like do something about it, right? Versus just like, that wasn't right. Let's like try not to do that or whatever. So that's cool. You mentioned that your daughter's in 3rd grade right now in Taiwan during your 3 months there. How did you finagle that? Because I don't think that's something most people think is like an option to just like drop in for 3 months of 3rd grade in Taiwan. How'd you finagle that?
Well, both my kids were born in Taiwan, so they have citizenship. They have dual citizenship. And then you need a permanent address in Taiwan in order to go to public school. So our permanent address is my mom's place. And it's basically, if you're a citizen, you get to go to school. But I didn't really tell the school we're only doing for 3 months, because technically they don't want you to do that, of course. But once we got in, because I feel like it's just like the administration that prefers you to not do that. So once we got in, I talked to her teacher and was like, hey, we're actually just doing this for 3 months. So then her teacher would kind of go easier on her. And also we homeschool. Like last year, my daughter did go to school, but we prefer to homeschool. So then we have the option of, coming back to Taiwan for 3 months, because we try to do that every 3 years. I hope it'll become every 2 years, but we'll see.
That's a serious commitment, yeah. What's the most rewarding part of the immersion and the learning that you're doing with the kids?
I think just being able to enjoy, like, see them enjoy Taiwan, see them enjoy, some of the books that I had as a kid. It's like some of the picture books I really loved when I was little. Being able to read it with them is so sweet and so special. Or celebrate Chinese New Year with them and read about it, have them say gongxi gongxi and like get the red envelope. I think just like little memories I had as a kid and being able to pass that on to them and see them enjoy it has been such a cool thing to see.
It really does sound like you are not just teaching language, but you're trying to pass on the culture through the language. That's very cool. What are your top tips for things that have worked for you and other things that you like often recommend to parents that are trying to go down this route of creating a bilingual speaking environment within the household? Broad strokes. I'm not trying to give your whole platform away, but like, if someone is like, I want to do this, but I have zero experience, I don't even know where to start.
I say start right away. Like, start where you can. Don't feel like your Chinese needs to be perfect in order to teach your kids, because when you are using what you know, you're giving yourself an opportunity to practice and get better at the language too. And like both of you shared, I think we grew up with so much criticism that it's hard to feel equipped enough to teach your kids when you are, especially if you're learning with your kids or you're going back to your roots and trying to relearn. So start where you're at, and it's okay, because actually you modeling what it looks like to learn a second language is very empowering for your kids. And also, kids love to do things with their parents. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just the fact that you are doing it with them makes it special and makes it fun for them. The second thing is make it doable, like make micro goals. Like one of my members, I love the phrase micro goals, because I feel like as parents, we're so busy already. You don't want to feel like I need to set out an hour each day to teach my kids Chinese. Like start with 10, 15 minutes of, if you could talk about the meal or bath time or washing their hands in Chinese, just start there. It doesn't have to be this huge undertaking, because I feel like when we think about language learning, it just feels like this insurmountable goal. And I'm sure both of you, I don't know if both of you are trying to learn Mandarin, like grow in Mandarin Chinese, it could feel really overwhelming. But if you make it into like a micro goal, like I'm just going to read one sentence today, then it's doable and you're not going to procrastinate, and you will be able to build consistency in that. And consistency is actually the key to language learning. When you set something out to do that's, manageable and fun, then you will actually do it. And then you will be consistent and you'll see progress and build momentum. And the last thing I would say is don't try to do it alone. I know a lot of parents will feel like I'm the only person who can give the input, or there's nobody in my community who's doing the same thing. Because a lot of my friends who are even more fluent than I am, or grew up in Taiwan and immigrated to America, like in college or for a job, they are not teaching their kids Chinese. I thought we used to live in Minnesota and then we moved to Kansas City, which is not like Taiwanese Central or anything, but there are more people who speak Mandarin there than, rural Minnesota. But I'm like the only person who's doing this in my friendship group. So it could feel really lonely and stressful, and you feel like you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself. But try not to just take it all on yourself. You could outsource. There's so many online classes now. There's group classes, there's play groups online for kids, there's art classes, there's like Procreate classes. In Mandarin, there are tutors who will play Minecraft with your kids in Mandarin. It's like there's so many interesting options out there to help you support the language. So really take advantage of it so you're not trying to do it on your own, because this is like a marathon and you don't want to be running on your own. So those are my top 3 tips I think I give most often to parents.
Wow, power of the internet. I did not know you could pay someone to play Minecraft in Mandarin. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing those tips. I think it's about the right time to segue into close. What have you learned about yourself through this process of trying to teach your kids to be bilingual?
Such a deep question. I think through this whole process of becoming a parent and teaching them Mandarin, I've like embraced my identity more as like Taiwanese American. Growing up, I really, really wanted my relatives to think I'm Taiwanese. And I really did not want them to ever think I'm like ABT. Even though back then, being an ABT was like the cool thing. You know, a lot of people would go back and become like pop stars in Taiwan. But I just felt like othered if they would think that I'm ABT, you know. Like I'd go back in the summer and they would try to practice their English with me and I would like flat out refuse. I'm like, I'm only speaking Mandarin this whole summer because I wanted so bad to fit in. And I feel like also after COVID, there's more people speaking up and sharing their stories and more representation of Asian Americans. I feel like, wow, this is like a unique culture and this is a beautiful thing. And this is who I am. I'm not Taiwanese and it's okay. You know? And being Taiwanese American is great. And I love living in America. Of course, I miss Taiwan, but I feel like through this process, I've just embraced that identity and love the identity that I have as a Taiwanese American.
Love that. Snaps for that. Snaps. Awesome. Sunny, this was a pleasure to have you on. Let our listeners know how they can find you and how they might be able to work with you, maybe, if they are interested in that.
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Spotted Sunshine Chinese, and my website is spottedsunshine.com. If you're interested in, joining a community, a supportive community that will equip you and empower you in how to teach your kids Mandarin Chinese, be sure to join the waitlist for my membership, Sunshine Bilingual Village. We would love to welcome you and have you a part of a village that helps you stay accountable and give you the best resources to teach your kids Mandarin Chinese.
Definitely check that out. And listeners, if you have questions for Sunny or if a lot of what we talked about like vibes with what you've been through as a kid or through your Mandarin learning or teaching experiences, drop it in the comments of wherever you're currently watching or listening to this episode. And come back next week because we will have another fresh episode for you then. And until then, 再见, bitches.